Okay, I think most of you are here for the RMS Empress of Ireland Part 1. This is the ship launched in 1906. I got a couple slides on it. It's a little smaller than the Titanic, and it had done about 75 or 100 cruises, transatlantic crossings or so. And then it sank. It left Quebec on May 28, 1914. 14 hours later, it was in the St. Lawrence River. Some heavy fog rolled in. A Norwegian ship rammed its side and really just ripped it open. That was so dramatic. It had a lot of the safety improvements in terms of hull design, but it didn't help. And the death toll, yes, was less than Titanic's, but in terms of passengers, it was a little bit more. And only 8 out of 67 Salvation Army staff and family members who were heading to the UK survived. Very tragic. Here is the location, final resting place in the St. Lawrence River. It's in shallow water, so divers were able to recover the mail. And in the earlier presentation, I did have some examples of mail that was recovered. But this is part 2. This is the rabbit hole. It starts off with what looks like a pretty innocuous, boring, actually, piece of postal stationery. I mean, yeah, it's got a nice Canadian National Exhibition slogan. What's so special about it? Well, let's look at the date. It's a week after the sinking of the Empress of Ireland. That was May 29th. It sank. It was June 5th. They're saying, and what did it say on the back? Somebody had already printed up these postcards. It's a pre-publication announcement. It describes that they're going to publish a book. This John C. Winston Company is going to publish a book, and this talks about this astonishing array of photographs and artists' drawings based on realistic descriptions of survivors. And it's a full account of the appalling accident told by the survivors, rammed by the collier Dorstad in Denswalks. These are the chapters, basically. Summoning aid by wireless, how wireless was used, and it was very helpful in this case. The quick response yet too late, picking up boats and bringing home the rescue. These are all the sections in the book. They've already decided what they're going to include in this book. This card has already been printed. The content decided, printed, and it's told by a master pen. Profusely illustrated, extraordinary operating for money making is only $1. And of course, they're looking to for agents to sell it. So you get the best terms to agents, complete outfit free and post-paid. But they've already decided what they're going to do, and they're printing it. And well, let's see where that actually leads to. It leads to this book, The Tragic Story of the Empress of Ireland, an authentic account of the most horrible disaster in Canadian history, constructed from real facts obtained from those on board who survived, and other great sea disasters by Logan Marshall. And containing the statements of Captain Henry George Hendel and Thomas Anderson, the commander of the Storstad. Who was this Logan Marshall? Well, his real name was Logan Howard Smith. He wrote books to order. He was the term I didn't know before, but he's called a hack in the trade. He's just assigned a job. You write the book. This is what you want you to write it about. Write it. He was also an editor with the publishing company, but his writing style is described as being a melodramatic, and we're going to have a couple examples later on. He also wrote other books on a variety of topics: sinking of the Titanic, the story of polar conquest. Of course, the Titanic had a huge element of disaster to it. The Arctic and Antarctic, one of those two, I forget which one it was, had also had a tragic element to it. This is what I'd be fascinating to read: the true story of our national calamity of flood, fire, and tornado. He also had a very strong Christian belief, and he wrote the Wonder Book of Bible Stories. You'll see how that comes out later in this book too. His focus of his writing as a hack was just to satisfy public curiosity about current events. And this made me think about the psyche of people 100 years ago and the psyche of people today. That hasn't changed. We are still in just the satisfying public curiosity about what's going on in our lives today is as important an issue now. It's faster now. As soon as we hear something, we have to go quickly onto the internet, find out about whatever happened, whether or not there was this fire or some tragedy somewhere that happened, or a flood. Of course, we all want to see the pictures, but it's that same, I guess I'm using the word psyche. It's just as strong as it was 100 years ago. It probably was part of human psyche 1,000 years ago too. So the book, here's a book that's actually, there's the cover of the actual book. It was published July 7th, 6 weeks after the sinking, 2 weeks after the Quebec inquiry concluded. And that's where they got all this information about the statements of the captains and the testimony. 350 pages. It was reprinted in 2012. And again, it's also available as an ebook in 2014. Now, these two would coincide with the 100th anniversary in 2014. But there's various other reprints also available on the internet. These are just two of the nice covers that I picked. What did it actually have? The storyline? Well, I talked about Captain Kendall blames the Storstad, of course, and Captain Anderson's, the Norwegian captor's defense. All these other topics, the heroes. It talks about some of the notable passengers aboard who died, the list of survivors. It also talks about from the tragic story of the Titanic. He had written that book already. The Titanic strikes an iceberg, and the women and children first, and then he's a little bit at the end. I was fascinated too as an engineer. He also talks about some of the technical stuff. And as an engineer, I was intrigued by the stuff that probably came out of the Quebec inquiry that is on the technical side. So it wasn't simply melodramatic, descriptive material, but it was also a bit of an analysis. Some of the quotes. I've looked at the book. I've downloaded the whole copy of the book, 17 meg, but it's freely available. I think there's the URL at the bottom, archive.org. And that's where you can get the whole copy of the whole book. And he writes in a really flowery style. It's fascinating to read. In this first quote, he describes the actual impact, the collision, and the immediate aftermath in the first, in that first 15 minutes. And this is what it is. It says a blow, meaning referring to the collision, a ripping, what's happening to the ship, the side taken out of a ship, darkness, the inrush of waters, a panic, and then in the hush, the silent corpses drifting by. So with the Canadian liner. That's pretty powerful language. I can see why he's got such a wonderful writing style. Here's another example. From every center of great calamity, waves. He's using the nautical connection. Waves of sympathetic sorrow spread to far distant strangers. But the perishing of great numbers in a shipwreck seems to impress our human nature more profoundly than do accidents or visitations of other kinds in which the toll of death is as great. I was curious to know what visitations he would referring to. Maybe it was of the visitation of the Black Plague, or I'm not sure, but it's an interesting, powerful language he's using. A couple more quotes. The Empress of Ireland was rammed by another vessel and so crushed as to be unable to remain afloat for more than 15 minutes after the impact. Overwhelmed by the catastrophe, we fall back upon that faith in the unseen power, which is never shaken by the appearance of what seems to be unnecessary evil or inexplicable cruelty. Here she's coming through with his Christian roots.
Yeah,
Though
that's pretty
he slay me, yet
melodramatic.
will I trust in him. Yea, it is only when God seems to slay us that we can trust in him. For trust begins only when knowledge fails, just as the stars shine only when the sun is gone. I did want to include one quote to show that it wasn't simply a dramatic and melodramatic description. It was also an analysis. And he talks about another opinion is that the use of the submarine bell would have prevented the collision of the Storstad and the Empress of Ireland. The bell is in use on light ships, but seagoing vessels use only the receivers, and the utility of the warnings by sound underwater between approaching vessels is not appreciated. I didn't know what a submarine bell was, so I checked it up in the dictionary. Merriam-Webster says it's an underwater sound transmitting device using the strokes of a bell to send messages or to send, at stated intervals, a signal as an aid to navigation in the fog. Now, it's interesting because sound waves travel faster in water than they do in air. And so we've talked about sonar. And sonar, I guess, was a later development when you'd emit the sound and then track when it bounced back. They're not talking about sonar here. He's just talking about using this ultrasound. And there was a patent involved. And the description of the book, he talks about, well, was the patent expired? If people didn't want to use it because they didn't want to pay the inventor his patent fees. But it's interesting that he not only talks in this book about the drama, the people and the descriptive side, but it's also a technical side. So what it did do, the outcome, one specific outcome that was as a result of the inquiry, and it had nothing to do with the Titanic, it was only a result of this one, is that the design of the bow of the ships in future ships was modified so that instead of it being a straight knife edge, that the bow would be higher at the front and would recede back like you see on most boats now. So that was so that if there was a collision, the damage would be above the waterline. So, and the final picture, well, it's me here in Antigua with a wooden mock-up of the Empress of Ireland, built by a local friend here, Dave. And he builds these model ships, and he's presented me with one.
Does it float in the bathtub?
No. It falls over. It's basically only 2 dimensions. It's not very cool.
Oh,
so it pretty much duplicates the ship's performance in real life then.
Yeah.